In this guide, I'm going to reveal all of my secrets for building powerful gaming or workstation PCs on the lowest possible budget. This video is all about price to performance, so don't expect any RGB or any other flashy accessories. The goal of this video is to provide you with an infallible formula for choosing which parts to buy and where to buy them in order to squeeze the most power out of your budget. We're going to go part by part, learning about which components offer the best price to performance and looking for the best place to buy them. By the time this video is over, you can be confident in your ability to score great deals on parts all the way from an entry-level 1080p gaming machine all the way up to a 4K monster. Let's begin. So the first component that we need to talk about is the graphics card. For a gaming PC, this is the most important component and will almost always be the most expensive. So let's start with the basics. First of all, there are two types of cooling systems for graphics cards. There are blower style graphics cards and there are air-cooled style graphics cards, or open air style graphics cards. Now, blower style cards are usually less expensive and they push hot air out of the case from the back. And this allows the blower cards to keep other components in the system from being affected by the GPU's heat output. The only problem with blower style cards is that they're usually louder and they don't overclock nearly as well. I often use blower cards for my budget builds because they come at a lower price and it allows me more flexibility with the case that I can buy. However, you should buy whatever you can find the best deal on. A blower style card will have one fan towards the back of the GPU, while open air cards usually have two or more fans. Every once in a while, an open air card will also have one centrally located fan. So let's take a look at this GPU chart here. Now, this chart shows the GPUs, the 4 GPUs that I use for my builds. These GPUs represent the best price to performance in various brackets, and we'll start with the RX 480. Any graphics card below the power of the RX 480, unless you find a really stellar deal on it, usually isn't worth it. The RX 480 offers probably the best price to performance out of any of the graphics cards on this list, but it's not suitable for everyone because it's pretty much an entry-level 1080p gaming card. You can buy an RX 480 for around $80 used, which is pretty cheap. And this will allow you to get into virtual reality, and it will allow you to get into 1080p gaming pretty well. Lots of games, especially those released around 2016, 2017, and 2018, can play on an RX 480 in 1080p at their highest settings without any trouble. Most VR games work very well as well. However, some of the newer ones like Half-Life Alyx, you'll have to dial some settings down to make it playable. Next up is the NVIDIA GTX 1070, which is quite a bit more expensive, more than double the price at $170 used, but it provides a lot of leeway over what the RX 480 was able to offer. The GTX 1070 can do 1440p gaming or 1080p gaming at much higher frame rates. And it's a far more solid choice for VR. Virtual reality, you'll find, gives you a far better experience with the GTX 1070 over on RX 480. The GTX 1070 can also be used as an entry-level 4K card. Most games you'll have to turn some of the settings down, but you can still eke out 60 FPS on a wide variety of titles in 4K with the GTX 1070. The next step after that is the NVIDIA GTX 1080. This costs around $275 used, so about $100 more than the 1070, and this is right about your mid-range 4K card. The GTX 1080 can handle most games, even newer modern ones like the newest Call of Duty and some other titles, at 4K on very high or even ultra settings. It can also handle, with 1080p or 1440p, some very high refresh rates on most titles. The GTX 1080 is a very powerful card. And finally, we have the most powerful card on my list, the GTX 1080 Ti, which costs about another $100 on top of the 1080, $200 more than the 1070, and this is for your high-end 4K and very high refresh rate gaming. This is an extremely powerful card, and it's just about the equivalent of the current RTX 2080. Now, you will notice that there are no extremely new cards on this list. You don't see the newest AMD or NVIDIA cards on this list, and there's a reason for that. Right now, the RTX series of cards, the 20 series or even the GTX 16 series, those newer cards, are far more expensive. You're going to get a far worse value out of those newer cards than out of these. So using cards that were released last generation, that are a few years ago but still very solid performers, is always going to be a better bet. So the best place to buy one of these GPUs is almost always going to be the Reddit Hardware Swap forum. And if you don't know what that is, you can watch my earlier video, which is right here. Hardware Swap consistently offers reliable used hardware for very low prices, especially GPUs. eBay is a good fallback or alternative if you find that you're not having luck with Hardware Swap, but for a graphics card, Hardware Swap should almost always be your go-to if you're buying used. The next most important part for you to decide on is probably going to be your CPU. Right now, in early 2020, AMD currently holds the best value products in the CPU market. There is one interesting CPU in particular that offers an incredibly fantastic value, and that's the Ryzen 5 1600AF. This CPU is the result of an odd market condition within AMD. The original Ryzen 1600, also called the 1600AE, was the cheapest possible multi-threaded 6-core CPU when it came out, and that made it a great choice for entry-level workstations and budget PC gamers who wanted to try streaming. Eventually, AMD was able to improve their CPU architectures, and they released new chips based on a smaller 12-nanometer manufacturing process. However, there was still this huge demand for AMD's original 14-nanometer Ryzen 1600, but AMD by this point had run out of the older chips to sell. Instead of canceling their product and potentially canceling all of the interest that people had in it, they decided to sort of covertly and secretly start using their newer chips, but branding them as Ryzen 1600s. Because of this, these CPUs punch far above their weight class, and right now I use them for almost everything. When you buy a Ryzen 1600, make sure that it's the AF model as shown here, and not the weaker AE model. These CPUs can handle 4K gaming and HD streaming very well, but they're not a fit for everybody. Serious content creators and people who want to game at frame rates well above 60 FPS might want to choose a different chip. We've already talked about the 1600 AF, so we're going to take a look at some of the other CPUs that I might use in different use cases. So let's take a look at this table. Now, the 1600 AF only costs $85 new, which is why I recommend purchasing it to such a high degree. But it really isn't necessarily for everyone, which is why I have these other 3 CPUs on the list. In the next price bracket above the 1600 AF is the Ryzen 7 2700. This will run you about $145 used, maybe a little bit more depending on what kind of deal you can find. The Ryzen 7 2700 is about as good as the 1600 AF when it comes to gaming, but because it has 2 more cores, it is significantly more powerful for heavy streaming or productivity use. So if you're the type of person who will be using this computer primarily for content creation or workstation use, and secondarily as a gaming PC, the Ryzen 7 2700 is probably the perfect CPU for you if you're building on a budget. In the next price bracket, we have the Ryzen 5 3600, which costs about $175 used or around $200 brand new. The Ryzen 5 3600 is a 6-core CPU. However, it's significantly faster for gaming than the 1600 AF is. So if you're the type of person who wants to be gaming at extremely high frame rates, if you're one of the people who's bought a 120 or 144 hertz monitor, and you're not going to be using too much productivity with your computer, then the Ryzen 5 3600 will fit your use case perfectly. And finally, if you're the type of person who's going to be gaming at extremely high refresh rates and who also needs to use your computer for heavy streaming or major productivity workloads, the Ryzen 7 3700X is probably the CPU for you. This is an 8-core CPU with the newest architecture and the best gaming improvements, and that cost about $275 for a lightly used one or $300 brand new. So whichever of these CPUs you buy, you can be sure that you're getting a good value. Any CPU that costs more than the $300 3700X, you're going to see diminishing returns on. You could pay $500, $600, or $700 for a CPU, but it will not perform all that much better than the 3700X for the price. The opposite is true with the Ryzen 5 1600AF. Any processor that costs less than the 1600AF will perform far worse and is not worth using in any sort of productivity or gaming related computer. Remember to try and buy your CPU with an included cooler. If you end up buying the processor brand new, it will almost always come with one. But if you decide to buy the cooler separately after finding a good deal on Hardware Swap or eBay on your CPU, then I would use the Cooler Master H212 Evo. This is a very powerful and well-received cooler with very high reviews, and it comes at a pretty reasonable cost. For the 1600AF, 3600, and 3700X, all of those processors can be bought new, and so Amazon is probably a good place to pick these up if you want to guarantee that it's going to come with the cooler and that it will come to you completely functional. The 1600AF especially should be bought new because it's only $85. There's really no reason to attempt to save maybe $5 to $10 and buy a used one, because then you're risking not having the CPU cooler, and you're risking that the CPU might not work as well or work for as long as you're hoping for. So the 1600AF, I pretty much only ever buy brand new. The 3600 and 3700X, you can find good deals on eBay, but buying them on Amazon brand new is also a pretty okay way to do it. For the 2700, these processors are no longer produced, so you can't buy a 2700 brand new for a reasonable price. Instead, what you have to do is you have to use Hardware Swap to look for the best deal. You can also use eBay as a backup, but I think Reddit's Hardware Swap forum is going to offer you the best deals if you're looking for the Ryzen 7 2700 CPU. Your next purchase should be your motherboard. Luckily, all of the CPUs in this build guide use the same socket and can all run on the same motherboard. That fact makes choosing a motherboard much easier. I always use AMD's B450 chipset for my budget builds. The B450 chipset provides plenty of flexibility, as well as the option to overclock for a very low price. I typically look for models made by ASRock, Gigabyte, or MSI, as their products are reliable and offer a good value. Always buy your motherboard new or professionally refurbished. Motherboards can be fragile and finicky, and a used one won't come with all of the screws that you need to install it in the case. Not to mention the fact that you usually won't find very much better deals on used motherboards in comparison to just buying them new. And especially if you're an Amazon Prime member, you can have your motherboard delivered to you in 2 days as opposed to waiting upwards of a week to get yours in the mail. PCPartPicker.com is the best place to find the best deals on brand new equipment. And since we're buying our motherboard brand new, this is the website that I prefer to use to find good deals on motherboards. PC Part Picker is a tool that compares all sorts of different components and all of the places that are selling them to find you the best deals. So we just clicked on motherboard, and let's take a look at our form factor here. I prefer to use Micro ATX. These are smaller boards that can fit in all sorts of cases. They're usually less expensive, but they still have the same abilities as larger ATX-sized motherboards. So I will click Micro ATX, and then as we mentioned before, we will be using the AMD B450 chipset. So we'll click that, and that will filter out anything that we don't want. Then I'll click our price indicator here to show us the motherboards with the lowest price. And there are two right here at the top that are the lowest priced MATX motherboards for the B450 chipset. The first one is the ASRock B450 MR 4.0. Now, this motherboard will fit in just about any standard case. you will be able to overclock your CPU. It will fit any of the CPUs and run them perfectly that we've talked about before. However, it only supports up to 32 gigabytes of RAM and only has 2 memory slots. So if you plan on using at some point more than 2 memory slots or more than the maximum of 32 gigabytes that this can support of RAM, then you might not want to buy this one, and instead you would want to look at the B450M DS3H, because the DS3H has 4 memory slots and 64 gigabytes of RAM is supported if you ever plan on upgrading to more RAM. Both of these motherboards are good motherboards. I've used both of them and I haven't had any problems with either. So let's pretend for a second that we've decided on the ASRock motherboard. What you're going to want to do is click on it and then take a look at the merchants that are currently selling it. And you'll see that this one is being sold on Amazon and Newegg, both for $64. However, with Amazon, it's offered with Prime shipping if you are an Amazon Prime member. So as an Amazon Prime member, I would choose to buy from Amazon. However, that may vary on a person-to-person basis. Talked about motherboards, it's time to take a quick look at our storage. You will be using 2 different types of storage, a solid-state drive and a hard drive. Solid-state drives are smaller but faster, and they're used for installing your operating system and other very important programs that you'll be using every day. The hard drive, it has a lot more storage, but it's much slower. So that will be used for things that you might not be using every day or that aren't quite as important. So that will include video game files, programs that aren't constantly used, and general file storage like documents and such. So let's talk about how to buy them. You will need at least a 120 gigabyte SSD to properly boot Windows. Buying or building a computer without a solid-state drive is a major mistake. The SSD is the drive that you will have Windows installed to, and so you want to make sure that it's booting up quickly. SSDs are much faster than normal hard drives, and having the SSD to boot off will make your PC seem at least 10 times faster for typical tasks, like opening programs and powering on. A 120 gigabyte SSD will run you about $20 or maybe a little less, while an inexpensive 240 gigabyte SSD will cost about $35 to $40. You will also need at least 1 terabyte of hard drive storage for modern computing, but many gaming PCs have 3 terabytes or more to store increasingly large video game files. Expect to pay around $25 or a bit more for a 1 terabyte drive and about $40 for 3 terabytes. Make sure that the hard drive that you buy is SATA or SATA and not SAS or SAS. SAS drives are made for servers, and they will not connect to a normal desktop PC. You might be surprised to see 3 terabyte hard drives for $20 or $30, but be warned, most of the time those are SAS or SAS drives, and those will not plug into a normal computer. Also make sure that your hard drive spins at 7,200 RPM and do not buy one that spins at 5,900 RPM because those will be far slower. The best storage deals are found on Hardware Swap, but eBay can also be a good go-to, and it is perfectly acceptable to buy your storage used. As a matter of fact, even the storage that I use in my most expensive and powerful gaming rig is almost all used things that I bought either on Hardware Swap or eBay. With storage out of the way, it's time to move on to RAM. Now, usually 16 gigabytes is the sweet spot for budget builds on anything that's not the lowest budget available with this method. If you're taking the lowest budget options for every category in this guide, then you would probably be okay with 8 gigabytes of RAM. But anything above that, you'd want to upgrade to 16, and you usually get a better value with 16 gigabytes of RAM as opposed to 8. For content creators, 32 gigabytes or more might even be necessary, but that is not necessary for gaming. I usually purchase my RAM brand new, and I find good deals on PC Part Picker. Hardware Swap, if you choose to go used, can also be very helpful. Make sure that you're getting DDR4 RAM and that it's clocked at least 2,666 megahertz or beyond. The faster the RAM is able to clock, the faster your processor will be able to move as well because of the architecture of AMD's processors. Always make sure to enable XMP in your BIOS in order to get the most out of your RAM. 16 gigabytes of RAM can usually be found brand new for between $55 and $65 on a good day. So why don't we take a look at what's on offer right now. So here we are back in PC Part Picker, and now we're going to be choosing our RAM or our memory. So for most builds, like I said before, you'll be looking for about 16 gigabytes. That's the gaming sweet spot, and that's basically the perfect amount for most users. Like I said before, if you're a major content creator, you might need more. So what we're going to do is we're going to choose all DDR4 memory that's 2666 megahertz or beyond. Anything below will seriously slow down your processor, and so you definitely don't want to buy DDR4 2400 even if it is a little bit cheaper. And then make sure that you're buying at least 2 8 gigabyte modules and not a single 16 gigabyte module. If you purchase a single 16 gigabyte module, you won't be able to put your RAM into dual channel. And dual channel RAM is required to make sure that Ryzen processors run at their full speed. So make sure that you buy 2 sticks and not a single stick. If you decide to go for 8 gigabytes on a very low budget build, buy 2 4 gigabyte sticks instead of a single 8 gigabyte stick, and you'll notice a huge boost in CPU performance. So let's take a look at what we can get here. Once again, we're going to put our price to lowest. And you see here that for only $64, you can get DDR4 at 2666 megahertz. However, I think that the best deal on this list is the Evo Potenza 16 gigabyte. And I actually have used this RAM in plenty of different applications, and it's always performed extremely well. This RAM is clocked to 3000 megahertz, and it only costs a couple dollars more than the 2666 megahertz RAM. So this would be my choice. However, depending on what you need and what you're looking for, you might end up buying something different. So let's take a look and see where we can buy it. And notice that on Amazon.com, it's in stock, but it costs far more money. This is probably what its release price was. Therefore, if you're going to buy it, you have to buy it on Newegg if you want to get the $66 deal. And that also comes with free shipping. We are nearly done with our list, and we are moving on to the power supply. Now, the power supply is a very interesting component. It's extremely important, but it's not necessarily very expensive. The power supply provides the power from the wall of your house or wherever you've got your computer plugged in to all of the components inside, making sure to give the right voltage to every single component. Now, that makes the power supply a very important part, because if the power supply is unreliable or fails somehow, it can destroy all of the rest of the components in your PC and cost you hundreds of dollars. So make sure to always purchase your power supply brand new. Used power supplies are just not trustworthy enough to rely on them to basically provide life for all of your other components, because if they fail, all of your other components could be seriously damaged. So what you want to do is choose your other components other than the case first, and then use a power supply calculator to find the wattage you need. So I'm going to show that to you right now. This is the Outer Vision power supply calculator, and this will tell you, based on all of the components that you've already chosen, exactly how much power you need to get out of your power supply. So for our motherboard, we will have a normal desktop motherboard. An MATX motherboard qualifies as normal desktop. One CPU, and let's use our Ryzen 1600. There it is. And we'll leave these at the default. Memory, we will have 2 8 gigabyte DDR4 modules. For a video card, let's say we bought one GTX 1070, which is one of the cards on the list here. So we will select the GTX 1070. And then for storage, we will have one 7200 RPM hard drive and one 120 gigabyte SSD, but that doesn't really matter as long as it knows that there's a single SSD in there. No optical drive, no extra things, standard keyboard, standard mouse. It will probably have about two 120 millimeter fans is the usual for a computer case that we would be looking at. And that should be it. So we'll say that we're using it 8 hours a day with 4 hours a day of gaming or rendering time. And it will tell us exactly how many watts we would need in that computer. So let's take a look. Calculate. There we go. And so it says here that for that PC, we would only need a 400 watt power supply, or 399 watts technically. And then it gives us a suggestion. However, all you really need is this number. So once you finish this, then it's time for us to go back to PC Part Picker and select the power supply that we would want. Here we are back at PC Part Picker, and now we're going to choose our power supply because we're always going to be buying a power supply new. We don't need to worry about looking for it on eBay, Hardware Swap, or any other used sale site. So as we saw in our power supply calculator, most of the computers that you can build through this build guide will only need 400 to 450 watts. However, some of the computer parts on this build guide, such as the GTX 1080 Ti and Ryzen 3700X, use a bit more power. So for those, you might want up to 550 watts of power. So let's take our power supply slider and move it so that we are within the range of the power supplies that we'd be looking for. And then what we're going to do is we're going to once again hit the price modifier to show the lowest priced options. Now there are certain brands of power supply that are perfectly okay to buy and certain brands that you absolutely should avoid at all cost. EVGA, Corsair, and Thermaltake are usually pretty good companies that offer decent power supplies for low prices. Other companies like RaidMax, Rosewill, or Diablotech are not to be trusted and should not be purchased. However, luckily EVGA and Corsair make up our lowest price bracket right now. So if you need 400 watts and no more, then the EVGA 100 is by far the least expensive option. If you need a nice 450 watt power supply that has more efficiency than the EVGA 100, then you might want to go for the EVGA BR. And if you want 550 watts and also good efficiency, then you would want to go with the Corsair CV. However, keep in mind that power supplies a lot of times come with mail-in rebates from the manufacturers. Let's click on this one and see whether or not it has one. Oftentimes these mail-in rebates don't fully work out. A lot of times if you get your mail-in rebate, it comes months later. And so I usually don't factor mail-in rebates into my final cost. So instead of costing, what did it say, about $30 for this power supply, the real price would be about $45 because of the $10 mail-in rebate. However, you can still get $5 off with a promotional code that's currently going on right now. So when you're taking a look at your power supplies, make sure to factor the mail-in rebate out of the final cost because a lot of times those don't pan out the way you would like them to. Now we are finally ready to purchase our case, and this is the last part of our build. The case is going to be the thing that holds all of your components together, and there are a whole lot of options out there. So we're going to take a look at different use cases and different abilities for computer cases. So when you first open up an area on PC Part Picker, it's going to show you all of the computer components that are the most popular. But what we're looking for specifically are the least expensive ones. So we want either ATX Mid Tower or Micro ATX Mid Tower or Micro ATX Mini Tower. Those three are going to be the least expensive and are going to fit perfectly with the motherboard that we've chosen. So then we're going to click our price thing to see what the least expensive options are in these categories. and there are a wide variety of options. So notice these first three, the NeoSilent, the HX300, and the Masterbox Q300L. The Q300L is the smallest of the three. It's a mini tower as opposed to a mid tower. Cooler Master typically makes fantastic cases, especially their Masterbox line. So if you're looking to build a computer in a small case, this would be a fantastic choice. Keep in mind, however, if the graphics card that you chose to buy is not a blower style cooler, this case could get rather hot because of its small size and its ability to collect heat easily. So if your graphics card is not blower, I would advise purchasing a larger case than the Q300L. If you did purchase a blower card, then the Q300L will give you more portability for your system, and the motherboard will perfectly fit inside of this case. Other options that are inexpensive are this Metallic Gear NeoSilent, which actually comes with this beautiful glass side panel that you can see all of your fancy components in, as well as a nice basement to keep your cabling in underneath. Currently, this actually costs $50, but has a $10 mail-in rebate. And remember, those don't always pan out, so think of yourself as spending $50 and not $40 on this. However, that's still a pretty good deal for a case with a glass side panel and a basement included. We can also take a look at another one of the cheap ones on our list, the HEC HX300. Now, this is a far simpler case. It's a case that will probably look nice for a long period of time because of its simplicity, and it's very cheap. No mail-in rebates, $40. It doesn't have the fancy glass side panel, but it does look rather nice and it will fit our motherboard as well. So when looking for cases, make sure to buy brand new because that way it will come with all of the hardware that you need and there will be nothing missing. And make sure to use one of these less expensive cases because a more expensive case won't make your computer faster, it'll just make it look different. Some cases are usually easier or more difficult to build in, but since the NeoSilent and the Q300L both already have pretty good reviews, you could trust that those two cases at least are going to be easy to build in. Alright, so here we are in our system builder with a bunch of parts that I have selected based on what I would build using this system. So, for the CPU I chose the Ryzen 5 1600, and that comes at $85 for the AF model that's really more equal to a 2600 than a 1600. And then that comes with its own CPU cooler, so I don't have to worry about that. I decided for this build on the DS3H motherboard, which includes those extra RAM slots, so you can have 4 different sticks of RAM instead of just 2. And I also chose 16 gigabytes of the 3000 megahertz Evo Potenza memory for $66. For storage on eBay, both of these were available. The Desk Star is a 3 terabyte hard drive that I found for $38, and the ADATA SU635 is a 240 gigabyte SSD that I found for exactly the same price. Once we go beyond our storage for a video card, I decided on the upper end GTX 1080. It's not quite as powerful as the 1080 Ti, but it's a great card for 4K, and it's a very good card for running high frame rates as well. And that one I found on Hardware Swap for only $275, which is quite a deal. This is a blower style card, so I decided to go with this smaller case, the Q300L, for $45. And then because I used one of the more powerful graphics cards, I decided to give myself some headroom on the power supply and went for a $41 EVGA 500 watt power supply. And so all of these parts would create a very powerful computer capable of 4K gaming, extremely fast browsing speeds. You could do some streaming with it and some workstation stuff, although this computer is definitely meant more for 4K gaming than anything else. And it has plenty of storage and a large SSD with lots of quick read and write speeds. And the cost for the entire thing would be about $670, or if the mail-in rebate actually ended up becoming a problem, or rather working out, then it would only cost $660.95. And so if you compare that to pre-builts that you could buy, or even things that you could find used on Facebook Marketplace, a computer this powerful would probably go for $800 to $1,000. And so using this method, you're saving at least $150 on all of these components, and you'll get something really powerful out of it that you can use for a long time. So that's really it. That's the way that I prefer to put together my PCs, and I will make sure to link at the bottom of the video all of the different charts and things that I used in the video so that you guys have quick access to all of those things if you need. I've shown you all of the best price to performance parts. Now it's your job to go out there and make sure that you're getting the best deals that you possibly can.